Perfection is an affront to a dying galaxy. To manifest true beauty in an age of unrelenting darkness is to invite the wrath of gods and mortals alike. Listen to the tolling of the great bells of Terra. Hear the mournful choirs that echo across the cold voids of space. They do not sing of victory. They sing of blood, and they weep for the brightest light the universe has ever murdered. In the sprawling cathedrals of Imperial theology, there exists a primal, foundational truth. It is the archetype of the dying god. The Imperium of man does not merely revere survival, for survival is a bitter and ugly thing. We worship sacrifice. We exalt the martyr who sheds his own divine essence so that the wretched masses might endure for one more day. This is the purest expression of our faith, a religion built upon the bones of those who gave everything. No figure embodies this tragic archetype more completely than Sanguinius, the great angel of the Ninth Legion. He was the absolute pinnacle of the emperor of mankind's grand design. While his brother primarchs were forged as generals, executioners, or architects, Sanguinius was crafted for a higher, infinitely heavier purpose. He was designed to represent the very soul of humanity's potential. He was the impossible ideal made flesh, radiating a terrifying purity that commanded love from the most hardened transhuman killers. Yet this radiant existence was doomed from its inception. The story of the angel is not a mystery waiting to be unraveled by scholars. Every citizen of the Imperium knows exactly how his tale ends. We know of the broken wings, the shattered armor, and the cold floor of the Arch-Traitor's flagship. The true horror of his tragedy does not stem from ignorance, but from absolute inevitability. Sanguinius possessed the curse of Foresight. He saw the exact manner of his own brutal demise long before the shadow of heresy fell across the stars. He felt the agony of his death 1,000 times in his dreams. And yet, knowing the utter hopelessness of his final battle, he made the conscious, agonizing choice to embrace his doom. He walked into the dark so that the light of Terra might not be utterly extinguished. He accepted his role as the dying god, a mythological ideal ground down by a universe that despises grace. But this beacon of impossible purity did not materialize from nothingness. Long before he was enshrined as the ultimate martyr of a stagnant empire, his physical form was cast into a far less holy cradle. Before the golden armor and the weeping statues, there was only the radioactive dust of a ruined, mutant-infested wasteland. To understand the death of the angel, we must first descend into the poisoned sands where his mortal journey began. The majesty of the Emperor's grand design was shattered in a single moment of unthinkable treachery. Deep beneath the rocky crust of ancient Terra, the subterranean gene laboratories were breached not by mortal weapons, but by an esoteric cataclysm. A violent vortex of pure unreality tore through the supreme psychic wards of the master of mankind. The veil between dimensions was forcibly rent apart by a hurricane of spectral fire and shadow. This was no random tear in the fabric of space, but a calculated and malicious strike by the ruinous powers. The dark pantheon of the Immaterium reached their immaterial claws into the Materium with agonizing precision. Among the 20 embryonic demigods secured in their technological wombs, the denizens of the warp directed a concentrated and venomous hatred toward Capsule 9. Even in his nascent and unformed state, the infant Sanguinius radiated a blinding intrinsic purity. His soul was a luminous beacon that burned with a divine potential. The Chaos gods recognized this shining light as a dire threat to their primordial sovereignty. They sought to smother this angelic ideal in the crib before his wings could ever unfurl to shield humanity. With a concussive shockwave that shattered the very bedrock of the Himalayan vaults, Capsule 9 was violently ripped from its amniotic cradle. The gestation pod was dragged screaming into the roiling madness of the warp. Inside the reinforced glass and auramite shell lay the ninth sun, a perfectly engineered demigod now reduced to a terrifyingly vulnerable infant. He was utterly helpless, trapped within a fragile stasis field while the galaxy's most malevolent forces swirled around him. The capsule was tossed through a chaotic journey across the Sea of Souls. Time and space lost all meaning as the pod tumbled through impossible geometries and oceans of coagulated nightmare. Demonic currents battered against the hull, seeking any microscopic flaw in the Emperor's craftsmanship. Formless predators and screaming warp entities clawed at the transparent viewport, hungering to corrupt the divine flesh within. Whispers of eternal damnation sought to infiltrate the slumbering mind of the Primarch. The dark gods demanded his immediate unmaking, sending tides of corrosive immaterial sludge to dissolve the protective seals. Yet the stasis field held resolute against the torrential hatred of the abyss. The Emperor's science proved just strong enough to deny the Pantheon their ultimate prize. Frustrated and enraged, the chaotic tides finally expelled the gestation pod with a violently dismissive surge. The capsule breached real space with a thunderous rupture, tearing back into the cold and uncaring void of the material universe. The howling madness of the warp was instantly replaced by the silent vacuum of an uncharted stellar system. Stripped of his majestic birthright and cast far from the guiding light of his creator, the infant lay suspended in the suffocating dark. The absolute isolation of the void pressed in on the tiny, glowing spark of life. Gravity soon caught the battered, frost-covered vessel in its merciless grip. The planetary pull dragged the helpless demigod downward. The pod began a terminal plummet toward a forgotten world of rust and toxic ash. A blazing streak of atmospheric fire engulfed the descending cradle. The capsule accelerated uncontrollably toward the unforgiving surface of an irradiated wasteland. The heavens of Baal Secundus tore open to vomit forth a falling star. Let us look upon the world that caught this plunging miracle. Baal Secundus was a realm of unrelenting nightmare. Long before the dawn of the Great Crusade, the Baal system had been a crown jewel of human achievement. It was a utopia of technological wonder, soaring spires and boundless prosperity. Then came the madness of the Age of Strife. The ancient lords of Baal unleashed weapons of such apocalyptic malice that they murdered their own biosphere. Paradise was immolated in adamant fire. Oceans boiled away into caustic vapor. The twin moons of Baal were reduced to scoured wastelands of radioactive glass and poisonous dunes. By the time the master of mankind began his conquest of the galaxy, Baal Secundus was nothing more than a planetary graveyard. The environment itself is an eternal apex predator. Caustic winds howl across endless toxic salt flats, carrying enough abrasive grit to flay the flesh from exposed bone. Invisible tides of hard radiation scour the desolate plains, baking the very marrow of those who dare to walk beneath the bloated red sun. Roaring radstorms sweep across the wastes, painting the bruised sky in sickly hues of purple and chemical green. Only the most abhorrent life forms thrive in this supreme desolation. Massive fire scorpions stalk the silica dunes. These mutated monstrosities bear armor akin to forged iron, wielding venom capable of boiling the blood of their prey in mere seconds. It is a world perfectly designed to slaughter everything it touches. Yet humanity is a stubborn, tragic infection. Clinging to a pitiful existence amidst the toxic ruins were desperate bands of scavengers. Chief among the inhabitants of Secundus was a nomadic clan known only as the Blood. They were a wretched reflection of fallen mankind. Generations of relentless exposure had devastated their genetic code. They were a tribe of radiation-scarred scavengers, desperately clinging to their pure strain humanity amidst a world consumed by the taint of mutation. Driven mad by unending hunger and the sheer cruelty of their hellish home, they survived through ruthless scavenging and the dark, desperate necessity of cannibalism. They possessed no hope, no high culture, only the primal instinct to endure another agonizing cycle. This was the abyssal hellscape chosen by the laughing whims of the ruinous powers. It was the absolute worst possible nursery for a being of flawless, golden perfection. A genetic masterpiece of the Emperor, forged to represent the very pinnacle of mankind, had been cast into a realm of utter decay. Where a prince of the stars deserved a cradle of silk and illumination, he was given a crater of irradiated ash and death. As the celestial fires of the impact crater slowly began to cool, the wretched scavengers of the blood noticed the rising pillar of smoke. Clad in their ragged radiation suits and gripping crude weapons of rusted scrap, the desperate mutants began their slow march toward the fallen star. The irradiated dust settled upon the glassed earth of the impact crater. The tribe of the blood, hardened scavengers of a dying world, approached the smoking fissure with weapons drawn. Within the glowing epicenter, they did not find a weapon of lost antiquity or a shard of stellar ruin. They found a child. Yet to the horror of the tribesmen, this infant bore the ultimate mark of the unclean. Folded against his fragile back were twin appendages of downy, pure white feathers. He was undeniably a mutant. Upon the toxic wastes of Baal Secundus, the law of survival was absolute and unyielding. To tolerate deviation was to invite the wrath of the poisoned elements. Mutation was a death sentence, dealt swiftly with the rusted edge of a scavenged blade or the blunt force of a stone. The elders of the tribe raised their crude weapons, bound by ancient, merciless taboos to purge the abomination before it could draw another breath of radioactive air. By all the cruel laws of this ravaged moon, the child should have died in the ash. He did not. As the blades descended, a profound and absolute majesty emanated from the infant, striking the minds of the executioners with the force of a physical blow. This was no mere aberration of the flesh. It was a psychic aura of staggering purity, a radiant warmth that soothed their battered souls and washed away the inherent malice of their world. Weapons slipped from trembling, calloused hands. The hardened killers of the blood, men and women who had butchered their own kin to survive another cycle, wept beneath the light of his innocent gaze. Overcome by a celestial resonance they could not possibly comprehend, the entire tribe fell to their knees in the irradiated dirt. They did not see a monster. They saw a divine being cast down from the heavens. Their devotion was immediately rewarded with a miracle of biology that defied all mortal reason. The child grew with terrifying, impossible speed. Within a matter of weeks, the fragile infant had expanded into the towering proportions of a demigod. The lethal radiation of the Baalite sands, which scoured the flesh from ordinary men, washed over him without leaving a single blemish upon his perfect skin. His infantile wings erupted into massive, glorious pinions of alabaster white, their span vast enough to carry his immense, heavily muscled frame into the toxic skies. Looking upon his terrible beauty and untainted perfection, the awestruck scavengers bestowed upon him a title worthy of his majesty. They named him Sanguinius, the Angel of the Blood. He was no longer merely a survivor of the wastes, but a being of supreme martial and spiritual power. The tribe had spared him, and in return, he looked upon his ragged, desperate worshippers with boundless compassion. The wasteland teemed with unspeakable horrors, nightmarish mutants, and predatory clans that threatened to extinguish his adopted people. It was time for the angel to test his divine fury against the darkness of Baal Secundus. The Blood Tribe had taken in a miracle, but survival on Baal Secundus required more than a mere talisman. To repay their mercy, the winged child became their shield, and rapidly their apex predator. The wastes of the Rad Desert were a realm ruled by cannibalistic mutant hordes, twisted aberrations that hungered endlessly for pure flesh. When these rusted warlords and their malformed legions descended upon the canyon settlements of his adopted kin, the youth answered with a terrifying revelation of blood. His first acts of violence were a staggering paradox to behold. They were beautiful, breathtakingly elegant, and ruthlessly efficient. He did not merely fight the encroaching monsters, he dismantled them with a preternatural grace that left his human onlookers weeping in a mixture of terror and awe. To witness a winged primarch upon the field of slaughter was to behold a terrifying new paradigm of warfare. Sanguinius was not restricted to the flat, dusty plains of mortal engagement. He brought the terror of true aerial supremacy down upon the primitive savages of the poisoned moons. His great white pinions were not merely decorative appendages, but instruments of sudden, overwhelming momentum and anatomical perfection. With a single thunderous downstroke, he could shatter the sound barrier, ascending into the toxic clouds before plummeting like a spear of divine wrath. He would descend upon the mutant warlords with the fury of a falling star, using his devastating momentum to cleave through rusted armor and corrupted bone in a singular apocalyptic strike. From the heavens he dictated the entire flow of combat, effortlessly spotting flanking maneuvers and isolating enemy elites with absolute spatial dominance. To look up into the blood-red skies and see this physically perfect being descending with a halo of irradiated light inspired an apocalyptic fervor in his followers. Men and women who had known only cowering fear now fought like berserkers, driven mad by the glory of their living god. Yet for all his angelic visage, Sanguinius was fundamentally a genetically engineered weapon of mass slaughter. He was constructed by the Emperor to conquer a hostile galaxy, and his trial by fire began here, in the radioactive ashes of a ruined world. Mercy was a luxury the wastes could simply not afford, and the angel offered none to the abominations of the deep desert. He systematically hunted down the cannibal empires, exterminating entire species of mutants with cold, calculated fury. He swept through the canyon networks and cleansed the desert valleys, leaving nothing but the severed heads and charred bones of the mutant kings. These grisly trophies served as an undeniable warning to any who would dare threaten his people. Through unparalleled methodical violence, he achieved what thousands of years of suffering could not. He broke the absolute power of the mutant overlords, crushing their supremacy into the irradiated dirt. In their place, he united the disparate, pure-strain human tribes under one singular bloody banner. The wasteland had finally been purged of its most nightmarish predators. The scattered human survivors now gathered at the feet of their new warrior king, breathing the poisoned air without fear, looking toward the horizon to forge a new epoch from the radioactive dust. With the blood-soaked dunes of Baal Secundus finally quiet, the great angel did not rest upon a throne of skulls. Where lesser warlords would have reveled in the slaughter of their rivals, Sanguinius laid down his blade and took up the mantle of the architect. He looked upon a shattered species, a desperate breed of cannibalistic scavengers driven mad by radiation, and saw only boundless potential. Through his divine will alone, he forged a fleeting golden age from the radioactive dust. He taught the warring tribes the forgotten arts of masonry, complex agriculture, and high philosophy. Vast amphitheaters and soaring towers of glass and stone began to pierce the toxic clouds of the blighted moon. The savage clans threw off their barbaric traditions, exchanging the desperate consumption of human flesh for the pursuit of noble rhetoric, painting, and poetry. We must pause to consider the immense sociological gravity of the Primarchs upon their disparate homeworlds. The master of mankind did not merely engineer genetic warlords to butcher the galaxy into compliance. He crafted supreme biological engines of civilization, immortal demigods, whose very presence rewrote the cultural and spiritual fabric of entire planetary populations. On a poisoned and dying world, Sanguinius manifested this profound truth by raising a utopian meritocracy from the ashes of atomic ruin. He demonstrated an inherent, radiant capacity for creation that perfectly mirrored his peerless aptitude for destruction. To the reborn people of Baal, he was no mere king or politician. He was fervently worshipped as a living god, a flawless celestial being draped in majestic white wings, who had descended from the heavens to save them from a lingering extinction. Yet beneath the deafening adulation of millions, the radiant king remained burdened by a profound and quiet sorrow. He walked among his adoring subjects with absolute humility, for his preternatural sight saw the lingering tragedy written into their very marrow. Despite his grand cities and his daily teachings of enlightenment, Sanguinius knew his people were still suffering. The irreversible genetic damage inflicted by ancient atomic weaponry lingered deep within their blood. It bred wasting sickness, hideous mutation, and a dark, unquenchable thirst that even his divine light could not fully eradicate. He was their savior, but he was painfully aware that he could not heal their deepest, most agonizing wounds. Still, he poured his immortal soul into uplifting them, ensuring that whatever short lives they endured were spent in absolute dignity and grace. The nascent civilization of Baal Secundus became a shining jewel of artistry and honor amidst the rotting darkness of old night. The spiritual brilliance of this resurrection was so profound that it echoed across the treacherous currents of the Imperium. It became a blinding beacon of hope and order, piercing the chaotic psychic tempests of the galaxy. Far away, navigating the darkened tides of the warp, an ancient and supreme intellect turned his golden gaze toward the galactic north. A celestial father had finally detected the pure light of his most beautiful son. The poisoned clouds of Baal Secundus parted not for the sun, but for a glory that outshone the stars. A grand armada of golden vessels pierced the rad-scarred atmosphere, casting long shadows over the irradiated dunes. Sanguinius stood upon the precipice of his conquered world, having unified the scattered tribes and reached the absolute pinnacle of what a savior could achieve on a dying moon. He looked up to the descending leviathans of the Emperor of mankind. Where other lost sons would meet their creator with boastful challenges, savage duels, or deeply entrenched suspicion, the angel felt only profound recognition. The blood in his veins sang a primal song of homecoming. A magnificent gunship touched the crimson sands, and from its ramp stepped the master of mankind. He was clad in auramite, a towering figure of blinding majesty. In that fateful instant, time itself seemed to halt across the blood-dust wastelands of Baal. Before a single word was spoken aloud, a profound telepathic communion bridged the space between the father and the son. Their minds touched across the vast psychic ether. In the mind of the Emperor, Sanguinius saw the burning tapestry of the Great Crusade, the purpose of his genesis, and the endless cosmos waiting to be claimed. In the mind of the angel, the Emperor saw a soul of absolute purity, forged in the crucible of a hellish wasteland. Overwhelmed by the staggering truth of his own existence, Sanguinius did not raise a weapon. He folded his great feathered wings and sank to his knees in the irradiated dust. Tears of sorrow and profound joy traced lines down his flawless face. He wept for the realization that he was no longer alone, and for the overwhelming majesty of the being who had crafted him. Without a single drop of blood spilled, without a single blade drawn in defiance, the Lord of the Blood Angels offered his absolute fealty. He surrendered his world, his people, and his very soul to the Emperor. The Emperor looked down upon the kneeling figure of the great angel. By the harsh laws of the burgeoning Imperium, the magnificent pinions that sprouted from the back of Sanguinius were a severe genetic deviation. They were a mutation, a taint of the warp that would normally warrant immediate and merciless purgation. Yet as the Emperor gazed upon this winged child of the cosmos, he saw no aberration. He saw his most perfect, beautiful son. For a fleeting, miraculous moment, the cold pragmatism of the galactic warlord melted away. It was replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated paternal love. The Emperor reached down and laid a gentle golden gauntlet upon the bowed head of Sanguinius. In the shadow of those resplendent wings, father and son were finally united. It was a singular moment of grace before the grim reality of a galaxy aflame would consume them both. The Emperor raised the angel from the radioactive dirt, preparing to take him from his poisoned cradle into the merciless void. A legion of blood-stained warriors waited among the stars, yearning for the arrival of their true sire. What Sanguinius found waiting for him in the ranks of the 9th Legion was not a host of noble warriors, but a nightmare made manifest. Before the coming of the great angel, the 9th were known across the stars by a far more sinister name, the Revenant Legion. They were an army of ghouls. Where other legions sought compliance through martial discipline, the early sons of the 9th unleashed a savage and insatiable bloodlust. They left no survivors in their wake, only ruined landscapes slick with gore. Their darkest hallmark was their extreme reliance upon the omophagia, the organ that allows an Astartes to absorb memories by devouring the flesh of the dead. The Revenant Legion did not merely use this as a tool of reconnaissance. They feasted upon the brains and viscera of their fallen enemies, literally eating the dead to steal their tactical knowledge, their languages, and their very minds. To witness the Ninth in battle was to watch an atrocity unfold, as power-armoured cannibals tore through the ranks of their foes with blood-soaked maws. Yet this horrifying practice was intrinsically tied to the unique resilience of their genetic lineage. The gene seed of the Ninth Legion possessed a miraculous and terrifying adaptability. It was designed to endure the most apocalyptic war zones, environments so toxic and irradiated that no normal human could survive. Because of this unparalleled genetic stability, the Legion could recruit from the absolute dregs of humanity. They took broken, irradiated mutants and savage outcasts, implanting them with the genetic legacy of the Emperor. The transformation was agonizing, but it allowed the Revenant Legion to replenish massive catastrophic casualties in a fraction of the time required by other legions. They were the ultimate weapon of attrition, throwing themselves into meat grinders and rebuilding their numbers from the shattered populations they conquered. However, this gruesome efficiency came at a terrible cost to their humanity. The wider Imperium looked upon the Ninth Legion not with pride, but with unvarnished disgust. Lords of the Great Crusade, and even their brother Primarchs, viewed them as degenerates and butchers barely a single step above the Xenos and heretics they slaughtered. Whispers echoed through the halls of Terra that the Revenant Legion was utterly broken. They were widely considered a failed experiment, destined for the same dark censure and total erasure that had already claimed the forgotten 2nd and 11th Legions. They were a legion standing upon the very precipice of annihilation, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. It was this horde of blood-mad cannibals that knelt before Sanguinius, expecting their newfound sire to cast them into the abyss. Instead, the Lord of Baal looked upon the monsters wrought in his image and felt only a profound, piercing sorrow. He did not turn away in revulsion. He looked into the bloodshot eyes of the Eaters of the Dead and saw his own sons, taking the full weight of their damned legacy upon his own winged shoulders. Sanguinius swore a silent vow in that fateful moment. He would not let them fall into darkness, but would forge these monsters into a legion of angels, no matter the price his own blood would eventually have to pay. Where another Primarch might have looked upon the cannibalistic horrors of the Revenant Legion with disgust, Sanguinius saw only his sons. He did not bring the executioner's sword to his fractured lineage. He did not order brutal decimations or merciless purges to cleanse the rotting ranks of the Ninth Legion. Instead, the great angel offered them a salvation few in this dark, unforgiving galaxy could ever comprehend. He offered them his unconditional love. He knelt before the weeping monsters who had eaten the dead of 100 shattered worlds, and he bade them rise as men. To forge the blood angels from the bloody ashes of the Revenants, Sanguinius instituted a radical philosophy of absolute duality. He understood with tragic clarity that the blinding thirst for slaughter raging within their gene seed could never be truly eradicated. It was a curse woven into their very marrow. It had to be chained. It had to be mastered. Thus began the profound transformation known as the angelic arts. Sanguinius commanded his violent sons to lay down their roaring bolters and take up the brush. He forced the immortal butchers of the Emperor to practice the delicate, deliberate strokes of calligraphy. He demanded they study the serene harmony of painting, the rhythmic meter of poetry, and the agonizing patience of monumental sculpture. He taught them a terrible and beautiful truth. To suppress their innate savagery, they must dedicate their eternal lives to the unrelenting pursuit of ultimate aesthetic and moral perfection. If their corrupted blood demanded they be monsters, their disciplined minds would counter by becoming supreme artisans. Through the creation of profound beauty, they would build an impenetrable fortress against the howling beast within their own souls. Even the grim mechanics of their engineered biology were sanctified by the Primarch. The Omophagia, the implanted organ that had previously driven the Revenant Legion to violently feast upon the raw brains of the fallen, was not ignored or hidden away in shame. Sanguinius codified their morbid biological hunger into solemn, deeply respectful spiritual ceremonies. The mindless, frenzied butchery of the battlefield was permanently replaced by the sacred communion of the Red Grail. To drink of the vital fluids was no longer a frantic, ghastly act of scavenging. It became a holy sacrament binding the entire legion together in shared nobility, profound sorrow and absolute restraint. They drank not to conquer the memories of their enemies, but to endlessly conquer themselves. Through these monumental cultural reforms, the grim ghouls of the Emperor underwent a metamorphosis entirely unparalleled in the vast history of the Imperium. They cast off the stained pall of the Revenant Legion forever. In their place stood the Blood Angels. Clad in masterwork armor of resplendent crimson and gold, they emerged from the shadows as the absolute paragons of Imperial virtue. They became the most noble, the most exquisitely artistic, and the most universally celebrated Astartes to ever march beneath the banner of the double-headed eagle. Their mere arrival upon a newly compliant world brought tears of overwhelming awe to the mortal masses, for they were the breathtaking physical embodiment of the Emperor's highest, purest ideals. Sanguinius had taken the utterly damned and crowned them in everlasting glory. The grand stage was now perfectly set for the glorious ascension of humanity. The darkest shadows of the Ninth Legion had been banished by the blinding, radiant light of their winged father, leading the entire galaxy forward into an unprecedented age of golden conquest. With his legion forged anew from the ashes of their former savagery, Sanguinius took his place at the vanguard of the Great Crusade. He did not merely conquer the stars, he illuminated them. To witness the Ninth Legion make war in those golden days was to see the wrath of heaven made manifest. Sanguinius fought as a blinding spearhead of unyielding righteousness. He did not direct his hosts from the safety of a distant command deck or hide behind layers of tactical auspex. Instead, he dropped directly into the beating heart of the enemy formation. Borne aloft on majestic white pinions, he was a soaring avatar of destruction and immaculate grace. Where the great angel landed, the battle lines of the Xenos and the Tyrant simply ceased to exist. His combat style was a kinetic symphony of aerial supremacy. He was a tempest of golden armor descending from the clouds, striking the earth with the fury of a falling star and the lethal precision of a master executioner. No defensive phalanx could withstand the sheer momentum of his celestial descent. Yet his matchless prowess upon the blood-stained battlefield was perhaps the least of his miraculous gifts. Consider how the ordinary citizens of the expanding Imperium looked upon the Emperor's creations. They looked upon Conrad Kurz with suffocating primal terror. They looked upon Rogel Dawn with cold, distant respect. But they looked upon Sanguinius with absolute and unyielding adoration. He was the golden sun of the expeditionary fleets, the brightest beacon in a galaxy populated by grim conquerors and pragmatic butchers. To the common men and women of a million worlds, Sanguinius was the living embodiment of the Emperor's secular truth. He was the ultimate proof that humanity could cast off the miserable shackles of old night and evolve into a species that was truly beautiful. He possessed a radiant nobility that inspired countless mortals to weep in awe at his mere passing. They willingly offered their lives in his name, not out of fear, but out of absolute devotion. He was rational, supreme, and completely devoid of the cruel arrogance that poisoned so many of his gene-forged siblings. Under the warm light of his outspread wings, the Imperium did not just expand its borders, it flourished in the genuine belief of a utopian dawn. This was the great angel at the absolute zenith of his legendary glory. He was a universally beloved hero whose quiet presence alone could quell bloody rebellions. He could bring entire star systems into compliance without a single bolter shell being fired. Planetary populations fell to their knees upon seeing him, completely overwhelmed by the sheer, heartbreaking majesty of his visage. He carried the massive weight of this galactic veneration with unwavering humility. He treated the lowest mortal serf with the same deep compassion and dignity that he offered to High Lord commanders. He was the aspirational soul of humanity made magnificent flesh. Such unparalleled perfection naturally drew the intense gaze of his brother Primarchs. Among that turbulent pantheon of demigods, petty envy and bitter rivalry were incredibly common diseases, yet it is a profound testament to the pristine nature of Sanguinius that he was cherished by almost all who shared his blood. There was one brother, however, whose bond with the angel eclipsed all others. It was a profound brotherhood forged in the fires of mutual respect, a unity destined to shape the fate of the entire galaxy alongside the rising star of Horus Lupercal. Of all the demigods forged by the Emperor, none stood closer to the great angel than Horus Lupercal. Their bond was not merely forged in the fires of compliance, but born of a profound and unparalleled spiritual resonance. Among the 18 brothers, they were the zenith of the Primarch project, two halves of a perfect whole. Horus was the consummate politician, the supreme commander whose charismatic brilliance could bind a fractured galaxy. Sanguinius was the soul of the Great Crusade, the spiritual anchor who reminded the Legiones Astartes of the humanity they were sworn to protect. Together, they were an unstoppable force of conquest and enlightenment, conquering thousands of worlds in the name of the Imperial truth. Yet beneath the gilded veneer of their brotherhood lay a complex psychological dynamic that would ultimately spell the doom of the galaxy. When the Emperor departed the Crusade and bestowed the title of War Master upon the Lupercal, Sanguinius offered nothing but his fierce, unwavering loyalty. The Lord of the Blood Angels knelt before his brother without a sliver of envy in his heart, ready to serve as the War Master's eternal shield. Horus, however, was tormented by shadows of doubt. In the private sanctums of the Vengeful Spirit, the newly minted War Master made a quiet, agonizing confession to those closest to him. He believed the Emperor had made a terrible mistake. Horus confided that Sanguinius, with his untarnished nobility and radiant perfection, should have been the one chosen to lead the Imperium's armies. The Lupercal loved the great angel with a fierce devotion, but that love was inextricably tangled with a crippling insecurity. To stand beside Sanguinius was to stand before a blinding light, a relentless reminder of every minor flaw and lingering ambition hidden within Horus's own soul. He looked upon his winged brother and saw the uncorrupted ideal that he himself could never truly embody. This profound adoration, poisoned by a quiet and agonizing inadequacy, forms the blackened heart of the Horus heresy. It is the very reason why the eventual betrayal would echo so catastrophically through the annals of history. When the War Master finally fell to the whispers of the ruinous powers, it was not just a rebellion against the Emperor, but a shattering of the deepest love two brothers had ever known. The tragedy of their bond is etched into the stars, a golden age undone by the fragile ego of a supreme commander and the tragic perfection of an angel. Yet this flawless radiance was merely a magnificent illusion. Behind the divine grace and the unyielding loyalty to the War Master, Sanguinius carried a terrible burden. The blinding light of the great angel cast long, inescapable shadows, concealing a creeping rot that rested deep within his own gene seed. A pristine facade was finally beginning to fracture, threatening to unleash an ancient, blood-soaked nightmare upon his beloved legion. Yet beneath the burnished ceramite and the noble rhetoric, a shadow festered within the bloodline of the Ninth. The galaxy marveled at the ethereal majesty of Sanguinius and his sons, ignorant of the genetic rot coiled deep inside their spiraling helix. The savage hunger of the Revenant had not been cured by the arrival of their Primarch, merely suppressed by his radiant example. This was the Red Thirst. It was a dormant curse that whispered in the mind of every blood angel, a predatory urge demanding the hot, vital fluid of the living. The terrible truth of this affliction remained hidden until the compliance of an obscure, defiance-choked world upon the galactic fringe. Away from the watchful eyes of the Rembrandtses and the wider Imperium, the sons of Baal launched a punishing assault against a fortified human enclave. Amidst the grinding attrition and the metallic scent of ruptured veins, the fragile veneer of nobility shattered completely. A detachment of the 9th Legion succumbed entirely to the gnawing ache in their fangs. They did not merely execute their foes with bolter and chainsword as the Emperor commanded. They fell upon the defenders like starving ghouls, tearing through armor and flesh with bare hands to gorge themselves upon the blood of the fallen. When the smoke finally cleared, the battlefield was a profane butcher's yard of drained corpses. Both enemy combatants and innocent civilians alike had been reduced to hollow husks by the mindless savagery of the Astartes. When Sanguinius looked upon the gory aftermath of his son's frenzy, his angelic heart was seized by a profound, paralyzing terror. The great angel knew exactly what the master of mankind did to creations that proved defective. He remembered the empty plinths standing in silent judgment beneath the Imperial palace. He knew the unspoken fate of the 2nd and 11th Legions, entirely erased from history for their own genetic or ideological deviancies. If the Emperor ever learned that the glorious Blood Angels were degrading into blood-crazed monsters, Sanguinius was certain his beloved sons would face the very same extermination. Thus, the brightest beacon of the Great Crusade became a desperate prisoner of his own mind. The perfect angel was secretly consumed by a suffocating imposter syndrome, bearing the crushing weight of a secret that could condemn his entire lineage to oblivion. Every smile bestowed upon his brother Primarchs and every triumph celebrated in the Emperor's name was tainted by the dread of discovery. Sanguinius ordered the massacre silenced immediately, violently scrubbing the incident from all official Crusade records. He buried the terrifying truth under strict layers of ritual and martial discipline, desperate to cure the curse in secret before the unblinking gaze of terror turned upon them. This hidden vulnerability would soon twist the great angel's judgment, forcing him into a labyrinth of defensive politics. His desperate need to prove his legion's untainted loyalty would push him to make fateful concessions on the grandest stages of the Imperium, inevitably guiding his reluctant steps toward a looming conclave on the ash-choked world of Nikaea. To harbor one devastating secret is a heavy burden for a demigod. To harbor two is an invitation to madness. Even as Sanguinius concealed the genetic degradation of the Red Thirst, a second curse bloomed within his transcendent mind. He was plagued by the psychic mutation of Foresight. These were not the clear, navigable prophecies of the Eldari, nor the calculated divinations of his brother Cursor. The visions of the great angel were sudden, agonizing seizures of the soul. He saw fractured timelines drowning in ash and blood. He witnessed the deaths of his sons, the burning of worlds, and the screaming ruin of the Imperium, yet he was almost never granted the context of these apocalypses. He was a prisoner to his own omniscience, forced to watch fragments of a dark future while feeling entirely powerless to alter the weaving of fate. This torment reached its agonizing zenith at the Council of Nikaea. The Emperor of Mankind had convened the galaxy's greatest powers to decide the fate of psychic warfare within the legions Astartes. Alongside Magnus and the Khan, the radiant Lord of Baal had been a founding architect of the Librarius. Yet when the Emperor's merciless gavel fell at Nikaea, decreeing the absolute prohibition of psychers, Sanguinius offered no defiance. He bowed his head and accepted the edict. He did not do this out of shifting loyalties, but out of absolute suffocating terror. The Blood Angels were already skating upon the edge of the Emperor's wrath, due to their hidden genetic flaw. Sanguinius knew that if he argued for the psychic arts, the merciless gaze of the Imperium might turn too closely upon his own legion. Worse still, they might look into his own mind. If the Master of Mankind discovered the apocalyptic omens searing themselves into Sanguinius's brain, The angel feared he would be condemned as a sorcerer or cast into the same forgotten oblivion as the two lost Primarchs. And so, to protect his sons, Sanguinius played the part of the utterly compliant, orthodox servant. He silenced his own librarians and condemned his psychic sons to the line infantry, swallowing the bitter ash of his own hypocrisy. The psychological toll of this deceit was immeasurable. Sanguinius walked the grand halls of the nascent Imperium, carrying the weight of unpreventable dooms, smiling at brothers he knew he might one day mourn. He became a creature of profound fatalism, convinced that destiny was a cruel master that could only be endured, never defied. This quiet resignation, this desperate need to keep the flaws of his legion hidden from the light of Terra, forged the very chains of his impending doom. Out in the dark, another brother had already begun to listen to the whispers of the warp. Horus Lupercal knew the lengths to which Sanguinius would go to hide his mutations, and the War Master prepared to turn those noble secrets into an inescapable snare. The fevered dreams of Davin passed, leaving behind a monster cloaked in the flesh of the War Master. As the ruinous powers took root within his blackened soul, Horus Lupercal cast his newly awakened gaze across the galaxy to evaluate the demigods he must either conquer or corrupt. The Arch-Traitor measured each of his brothers in turn, finding abundant weaknesses in their pride, their bitterness, and their unchecked wrath. Yet when his dark calculus fell upon the Lord of the Ninth Legion, the War Master hesitated. Horus knew, with absolute and sickening certainty, that Sanguinius could never be turned to the eight-pointed banner of chaos. The soul of the great angel was too luminous, anchored by a transcendent nobility that the whispering gods of the warp simply could not rot. This immutable reality birthed a strategic nightmare within the scheming mind of the ascendant traitor. Sanguinius was not merely a loyal sibling bound to the throne of Terra. He was the singular figure capable of stepping into the void left by Horus to rally the entirety of the fractured Imperium. If the War Master revealed his treason prematurely, the angel possessed the raw charisma and the blinding majesty to unite the remaining loyalist legions into an unbreakable shield of defiance. Worse still for the grand architects of the heresy, Horus recognized a terrifying martial truth hidden beneath the angel's beautiful veneer. Sanguinius was the only warrior in the entire galaxy who could match him blow for blow and potentially slaughter him in single combat. The great angel could not be swayed, and he could not be left free to intervene in the coming slaughter. He had to be utterly annihilated, entirely excised from the galactic board before the first true shots of the rebellion were even fired. To trap a divine being, the devil fashioned a snare, woven from his victim's deepest and most closely guarded vulnerabilities. Horus remembered the terrible secret Sanguinius guarded with such desperate, quiet agony. He remembered the red thirst, the genetic curse that threatened to condemn the noble blood angels to mindless savagery and the ultimate censure of the Emperor. With cold and ruthless precision, the War Master weaponized his brother's greatest shame against him. Horus sent a priority transmission to Sanguinius, speaking with the absolute authority of the Emperor's chosen proxy. He spoke of a remote and desolate region of space known as the Signus cluster. There, the War Master promised, lay the forgotten technology and the esoteric lore required to finally cure the blood angels of their hidden, shameful affliction. It was a masterful, devastating deception, cloaking absolute damnation in the gentle guise of salvation. The bait was perfectly calibrated to pierce the flawless armor of the angel's desperate hope. Blinded by the profound desire to save his genetic sons from the creeping degradation of their own blood, Sanguinius could not see the monstrous shadow looming behind the War Master's benevolent words. He gathered the magnificent unbroken host of the Ninth Legion, assembling his gilded armada to embark upon what he believed was a holy crusade of restoration. Sanguinius gave the fateful order to translate into the Immaterium, steering his beloved sons away from the safety of the Imperium and directly into the waiting jaws of hell. Translation into the Signus cluster was not a mere return to real space, but a descent into an abyss of unparalleled madness. The void itself had been bruised, the very stars weeping a sickly, coagulated crimson that stained the viewing ports of the Blood Angels' armada. Instead of the silent majesty of the cosmos, the void was alive with an unbearable, skin-crawling wrongness. The veil between the material universe and the immaterium had not just frayed, it had been violently torn asunder. Raw, unfiltered warp energy bled freely into the physical realm, twisting the laws of physics into a cruel and sickening parody. Planets did not orbit in silent grace, but contorted into grotesque, screaming faces of continental scale, their oceans boiling with the tormented souls of billions. The maddening presence of the ruinous powers saturated every atom of the system. Within the sanctums of the 9th Legion fleet, the astropathic choirs did not merely sing of danger, they ignited. Telepaths and navigators burned from the inside out, their minds shattering like glass under the crushing weight of a psychic agony so profound it defied human comprehension. At the heart of this nightmare stood Sanguinius, the great angel. He had brought his sons to this desolate region of space, clinging to a singular, desperate hope. He had believed with the earnest purity that defined his very essence that salvation for his gene sons could be found here. He had sought a cure for the dark, thirsty flaw that lurked within the blood of his legion. Yet as he looked upon the screaming void of the Cygnus cluster, the terrible truth crashed over him like a tidal wave of ash. There was no cure. There was only a meticulously crafted snare woven from the deepest, most cruel betrayals. The architect of this cosmic atrocity was not some faceless Xenos threat or renegade warlord. It was Horus. It was his beloved brother, the War Master, the one soul Sanguinius trusted above all others. The realization struck the Primarch with a physical force, a wound far deeper than any blade could inflict. In the quiet solitude of his command deck, the winged demigod fell to his knees and wept. He did not cry out of fear for his own life, nor did he shed tears for the terrible danger his legion now faced. Sanguinius mourned the death of his brother's soul. The sorrow that radiated from him was a palpable, crushing weight, an absolute heartbreak that echoed the tragic fall of the galaxy's brightest hope. Horus, the brightest star of the Imperium, had been swallowed by the dark. In that crucible of profound grief, a fundamental transformation took hold of the great angel. The optimistic crusader, the noble artist who dreamed of a peaceful dawn for humanity, died amidst the screaming stars of Signus. In his place rose a sorrowful, vengeful avatar of righteous fury. He dried his tears and drew his sword, his golden armor reflecting the bruised light of a corrupted heaven. The 9th Legion had been lured into the abyss, and the abyss was finally reaching back. From the warped planetary bodies and the bleeding anomalies of space, the true masters of this realm began to stir. The demonic overlords of the Cygnus system had tasted the despair of the angel, and they now moved to spring their infernal ambush. The cold void of the Cygnus system tore open as the veil of reality was violently shredded. From the festering wound in the warp emerged a psychic shriek so agonizing that it bypassed the physical senses entirely. It was the voice of Kiris the Perverse, a keeper of secrets bound to the Prince of Pleasure, broadcasting a telepathic taunt that coiled like a venomous serpent through the corridors of the Blood Angels' fleet. Space Marines staggered beneath the weight of this sudden, sickening violation, but for the mortal crew, the Daemon's laughter was an apocalyptic death knell. Human minds simply dissolved under the sheer weight of such concentrated malice. Navigators convulsed as their third eyes burst in showers of vitreous fluid. Armsmen turned their weapons upon one another in sudden, gleeful frenzies of slaughter. Across 1,000 decks, loyal serfs and bridge officers tore at their own flesh, hurling themselves into macro-cannon breaches or venting themselves into the void in horrific waves of mass suicide. The pride of the 9th Legion was transforming into a floating slaughterhouse before the first boarding pod had even launched. Yet the seductive poison of Slaanesh was merely the vanguard of a far darker intention. Waiting within the shadows of this orchestrated nightmare was a creature of absolute slaughter, the Bloodthirster Kabanda. To understand the true horror of Signus Prime, one must understand the singular burning obsession the blood god harbored for Sanguinius and his sons. Khorne did not desire the mere destruction of the blood angels. Annihilation is a simple thing, lacking the exquisite triumph of spiritual conquest. The Lord of Skulls looked upon the noble, artistic sons of Baal and saw the ultimate prize. He wanted to take the brightest, purest angels in the Emperor's host and shatter their nobility forever. Khorne sought to drown their arts and philosophies in a tide of crimson, corrupting them into his most frenzied, unthinking berserkers. To break Sanguinius was to spit in the eye of the master of mankind, and Kabanda was the chosen instrument of this desecration. Paralyzed by the psychic assault and crippled by the sudden loss of their mortal crews, the magnificent warships of the 90th Legion plummeted from the poisoned heavens. They crashed down upon the surface of Signus Prime in catastrophic showers of twisted metal and burning promethium. What had once been a prosperous human world was now a hellscape terraformed by the warp. The surviving Blood Angels clawed their way out of the burning wreckage of their drop pods and fallen cruisers, stepping onto an apocalyptic battlefield forged entirely of grinding bone and jagged brass. Disoriented, deafened by the roar of descending warp storms and suffering massive casualties, the sons of Sanguinius were instantly forced into a brutal, claustrophobic ground war. They stood surrounded by endless legions of demonic horrors, completely cut off from the light of Terra. The air itself tasted of copper and ash, slipping into the lungs of the Space Marines and stirring something dark and ancient within their genetics. Every desperate swing of a chainsword, every spray of arterial fluid from a fallen brother, tightened the invisible vice around their minds. The relentless psychological pressure of this demonic ambush began to chip away at their noble facade. Deep within the genetic inheritance of the Legion, a sleeping curse tasted the blood on the wind and began to violently stir. The breaking point was not a matter of martial failure, but of spiritual collapse. As the demonic slaughter reached a crescendo of unparalleled butchery, the Bloodthirster Kabanda reared back and unleashed a psychic bellow of pure, malefic hatred. The shockwave tore across the battlefield, not as a physical force, but as a metaphysical tempest. In a single, catastrophic instant, the foul resonance of the demon shattered the delicate mental wards Sanguinius had painstakingly woven around the minds of his sons. The dam broke, the red thirst took them all. To understand the absolute tragedy of this moment, one must comprehend the true nature of the genetic curse afflicting the 9th Legion. This was no mere combat frenzy or the mindless berserker rage favoured by the World Eaters. The red thirst is a biological imperative, a predatory vampiric necessity woven into the very helix of the sanguinary bloodline. It is the dark secret they carried from the desolate wastes of old Terra, a horrifying regression to the era when they were known only as the Eaters of the Dead. When the thirst descends, the noble facade of the angel is burned away, leaving only an atavistic ghoul craving the hot iron tang of vital fluids. Across the blasted plains of Signus Prime, an entire legion of transhuman warriors dropped their bolters into the dust. Tactical discipline and overlapping firing lines evaporated. The sons of the great angel threw themselves into the endless hordes of the warp with their bare hands. Ceramite gauntlets crushed demonic skulls, while elongated fangs tore through the corrupted flesh of mortal cultists. They drank deeply of the ruin around them, howling not with righteous fury, but with the feral desperation of starved predators. Their armor, once gleaming with artisanal pride, became slick with the gore of their macabre feast. The angels had become the very monsters they were engineered to slay. High above the carnage, Sanguinius bore witness to the ultimate unraveling of his grandest ambition. The Primarch watched as the culture of art, nobility, and grace he had instilled within his sons was washed away in a tide of bestial bloodlust. His beautiful, radiant legionaries were reduced to raving beasts in the span of a single heartbeat. The sorrow that seized the demigod was absolute, a crushing weight of despair that threatened to tear his soul asunder. Yet in the crucible of that apocalyptic betrayal, his grief did not paralyze him. It crystallized into an icy, blinding fury. Sanguinius turned his gaze through the choking miasma of the battlefield, ignoring the frenzied slaughter of his fallen sons. His majestic wings flared with a brilliant, ethereal light that pierced the suffocating gloom of the warp. He sought the architect of this boundless madness. Through the sea of writhing bodies and clashing steel, Sanguinius found the towering, monstrous silhouette of the demon who had condemned his lineage. To save his sons from the madness consuming their souls, the great angel sought to sever the head of the demonic serpent. He found his quarry in the ruination of Signus Prime, waiting amidst mountains of the dead. Karbanda, greater demon of the blood god, was a nightmare of brass and corded muscle forged in the deepest pits of the warp. Their clash shook the heavens, a duel between divine grace and boundless primordial savagery. Grief weighed heavily upon Sanguinius, his heart already bleeding from the corruption of his beloved legion. The Bloodthirster seized upon this sorrow with brutal, unforgiving fury. A crack of the demon's dark whip split the poisoned sky, wrapping around the legs of the Primarch. With a sickening crunch of superhuman bone, Karbanda shattered the limbs of the Emperor's most perfect son. Sanguinius was cast down onto the blasted earth. Excruciating agony racked his angelic frame as the dark magic of the whip flared through his nervous system. The Bloodthirster loomed over his fallen foe, savouring the taste of immortal despair. To ensure the ultimate spiritual defeat of the Primarch, the beast turned its towering wrath upon the Blood Angels themselves. Right before the eyes of their paralyzed father, Karbanda waded into the ranks of the Astartes. Hundreds of the Emperor's finest warriors were slaughtered in mere moments. The psychic shockwave of their deaths slammed into Sanguinius, a tidal wave of psychic agony meant to break his celestial spirit forever. Instead of immediate defiance, the psychic agony of his dying sons plunged Sanguinius into a profound, deathly coma. Yet the demon's triumph was fleeting. Days later, within the shattered body of the great angel, a cold, infinite wrath finally awakened to burn away his suffering. Rising from his sickbed through an act of sheer, unfathomable willpower, Sanguinius refused to remain broken. His shattered legs still burned with agony, yet he refused to kneel. With a thunderous crack, his pristine white wings snapped open, catching the foul winds of the demon world. Using his magnificent pinions for explosive propulsion, the Primarch launched himself back into the air. He struck Karbanda like a descending comet, tackling the towering behemoth into the bleeding sky. The demon roared in sudden panic as divine strength overpowered unholy mass. At the apex of their ascent, Sanguinius seized the Bloodthirster with unbreakable resolve. With a cry that echoed across the warp, the Primarch turned his divine fury upon the beast's leathery pinions. In a catastrophic display of strength, Sanguinius tore the right wing from Karbanda's back, rendering the greater demon a broken, shrieking ruin. He then hurled the mutilated, humiliated entity back into the churning warp rift from whence it came. The banishment of Karbanda shattered the demonic lines, yet this Pyrrhic triumph offered no true salvation. The architect of their torment was broken, but the trap had already sprung. The stars above them vanished, swallowed entirely by the swirling madness of the warp. The absolute darkness of the Ruinstorm closed its jaws around the system, trapping the battered legion in an endless, terrifying night. The galaxy was broken. A festering wound of warp storms known as the Ruinstorm had cleaved the void in twain. Navigators screamed as their third eyes melted, blinded by the absolute chaos that severed the eastern fringe from the heart of mankind. Through this churning madness, the battered remnant of the Blood Angels' Legion limped onward. They had survived the daemonic meat grinder of Signus Prime, but their victory tasted of ash. Isolated and adrift, they found no path to Terra, only the cold sanctuary of Macragge. Here, Primarch Guilliman, the Lord of Ultramar, looked upon the severed galaxy and despaired. Silence stretched across the astropathic choirs. To Guilliman's hyper-rational mind, the silence meant only one thing. Terra had fallen. The Emperor was dead. Refusing to let the dream of humanity fade into the encroaching night, Guilliman enacted his most desperate contingency. He forged Imperium Secundus. It was to be a bastion of order amid the ruin of the cosmos, a new beacon to gather the lost and the loyal. Yet an empire cannot exist without a sovereign, and Guilliman knew that he himself could not wear the crown without inciting civil war among the surviving loyalists. The avenging son, alongside Lionel Johnson, turned to the only being possessing the grace and majesty to unite them. They turned to Sanguinius. Thus the great angel was crowned Emperor of Imperium Secundus, but the diadem was a crown of thorns upon his brow. History must remember the absolute agony Sanguinius endured upon that golden throne. To the masses of Macragge, he was a blinding avatar of hope, a celestial being of radiant perfection. To himself, he was a grotesque impostor playing a usurper's game. Every proclamation he signed felt like a dagger drawn against his true father. Every cheer from the gathered crowds echoed in his ears as a damning chant of treason. He abhorred the sovereign power thrust upon him. Where lesser men would have revelled in dominion over a resurrected empire, the angel sat in a state of suffocating misery. His humility was his deepest torment. He did not want to be a ruler of a fractured realm, nor a god to desperate mortals. He wanted only to be a son, standing shield to shield with his creator on the ramparts of the throne world. The gilded halls of Macragge became a gilded cage. His immense feathered wings drooped with the weight of unspeakable depression and crippling anxiety over Terra's unknown fate. He stared out across the manicured perfection of Ultramar and saw only ashes. His soul remained anchored to the birthplace of humanity, tethered by an unshakable, desperate hope that Guilliman was wrong. In the quiet dark of his sanctum, Sanguinius begged the silent stars for a sign. He sought any proof that his father still lived, any justification to cast aside this false crown and fly into the storm. The suffocating safety of Imperium Secundus could not hold him forever. Deep within his angelic blood, the latent curse of Foresight began to stir, weaving a terrible prophecy that would demand a final, bloody choice. The crown of Imperium Secundus rested heavy upon the brow of Sanguinius, yet it was not the weight of empire that tortured his soul. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, stalked the shadows of Macragge like a lingering plague. The deranged Primarch sought not merely to kill his angelic brother, but to break his spirit with the paralyzing terror of inevitability. Kurz whispered of a preordained future where all hope burned to ash, taunting Sanguinius with the inescapable chains of fate. Driven into the quiet, suffocating darkness of his inner sanctum, the great angel sought the absolute truth. He laid out the psychocrystalline cards of the Emperor's tarot. For years, his innate gift of foresight had offered him fragmented, shifting reflections of bloody futures. But in this terrible stillness, the warp settled, and the cards revealed a singular, irrefutable path. The vision struck Sanguinius with the force of a physical blow. He did not merely see the future, he lived it. He stood upon the rusted, corrupted decking of a colossal warship in orbit above a burning Terra. At his feet lay the shattered corpse of a blood angel, a beloved son broken in a futile attempt to shield his father. Before him stood the War Master. Horus was no longer the noble brother he had loved, but a swollen nightmare vessel of the dark gods. Then came the blinding agony. Sanguinius felt the exact excruciating moment of his own murder. He felt the monstrous talons tear through his golden armor, the catastrophic snapping of his spine, and the cold void rushing in to claim his final breath. He experienced the psychic shockwave of his death echoing through the warp, a cry of sorrow so profound it would damn his genetic line to eternal madness. The philosophical weight of this revelation was absolute. Sanguinius was presented with the ultimate test of his eternal loyalty. He was currently safe upon Macragge, surrounded by unbreachable walls and massive armies as the reigning sovereign of a new empire. If he remained within the borders of Ultramar, he would survive the galactic civil war. If he journeyed to Terra, he would die in agony, butchered by the very brother he had once worshipped. There were no variables left to manipulate, no hidden chances of victory to cling to. Yet in the face of absolute unavoidable annihilation, the great angel did not flinch. He accepted his doom in the very heartbeat it was revealed to him. True courage is not the absence of fear, nor is it the blind hope of triumph against overwhelming odds. The unmatched courage of Sanguinius was forged in the absolute certainty of his own gruesome demise. He chose his grim duty over survival, embracing a sacrificial death simply to buy his father a fleeting chance to save mankind. With the peace of the condemned settling over his winged shoulders, Sanguinius gathered his brothers. The time for hiding behind the safe walls of a secondary empire had passed. They now faced a seemingly impossible mandate. They had to plunge their fleets directly into the howling madness of the Ruinstorm, tearing a bloody path through the warp so the angel could fly to meet his executioner. The decision was made, and the triumvirate of loyal sons cast their armadas into the screaming maw of the Ruinstorm. To breach this unnatural barrier was to sail ships of mere metal into the bleeding throat of hell itself. Lorgar had woven this galactic anomaly from the slaughter of billions, an impassable tempest of raw, malefic warp energy designed to isolate Terra from her greatest defenders. Navigators went mad in their sanctums, their third eyes burning to ash as they gazed upon the impossible tides of chaos. The Astronomicon was gone, smothered beneath a suffocating blanket of demonic static. Blind and battered, the combined fleets of the Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Ultramarines were drowning in the dark. Yet they were not without a guiding light. Where the mutant navigators failed, the Great Angel took the helm. Sanguinius, burdened by the terrible gift of Foresight, stood resolute amidst the howling madness. He projected his mind into the roiling warp, using his own prophetic visions of his death as a morbid compass. He knew he would die aboard the Vengeful Spirit, therefore the warp could not claim him here. Through sheer force of will, Sanguinius carved a path through the screaming ether, guiding the loyalist vessels across tides of boiling blood and oceans of shadow. But the Ruinstorm was not simply a phenomenon of weather. It was a sentient blockade, manned by the myriad fleets of the traitor legions and horrors birthed from the nightmare realm. The loyalist armada was bogged down, assaulted on all sides by enemies that defied reason and reality. Time was bleeding away, and the throne world could not wait. It was here, in the suffocating dark, that a grim truth settled upon the Primarchs. The triumvirate could not remain united if even one of them was to reach the Emperor in time. Primarch Guilliman and Lionel Johnson looked upon their winged brother and recognized the necessity of sacrifice. The Avenging Sun and the Lord of the First commanded their vast armadas to break formation. They threw the full, devastating might of the Ultramarines and the Dark Angels against the encroaching traitor blockades. They became the ultimate diversion, drawing the endless hordes of chaos away from the Blood Angels. In doing so, Guilliman and the Lion willingly surrendered their own chance to stand upon the walls of the Imperial Palace. They condemned themselves to the void, fighting a forgotten war in the shadows so that the true spearhead might fly true. As the vanguard vessels of the 1st and the 13th vanished into the swirling storm of war, Sanguinius felt the agonizing weight of their sacrifice. The guilt of leaving his brothers behind gnawed at his noble soul, an iron burden added to the chains of his own impending doom. Every league gained was bought with the blood of his kin, yet this sorrow only fueled his grim determination. He demanded his captains push their plasma drives to the brink of detonation, accelerating toward his prophesied demise with a terrifying, angelic fury. He would not let the sacrifice of his brothers be in vain. The red tear pierced the final veil of the Ruinstorm, tearing a ragged hole in the fabric of the nightmare. The cradle of mankind was burning. The skies over Terra, once a tapestry of azure and gold, had become a bruised canopy of suffocating black. Ash rained down like the snows of a dead winter, mingling with the unnatural precipitation of demonic blood and the fiery contrails of traitor drop pods. Upon the ramparts of the Imperial Palace, the mortal defenders were breaking. These were ordinary men and women, frail creatures of flesh and bone, forced to stare into the abyss of the warp. They watched nightmare horrors claw their way into reality, and their minds began to fracture. Despair was a heavier burden than the armor they wore. The war was lost, they whispered in the dark, for what mortal could stand against the encroaching hell? Then came the dawn, not from the east, but from the zenith of the poisoned sky. A singular streak of incandescent light pierced the suffocating gloom. Sanguinius descended. To the exhausted guardsmen clutching their laser guns in trembling hands, he was not merely a warlord. He was a literal angel of myth, torn from the pages of forgotten scriptures to deliver them from evil. His wings caught the ambient fires of the dying world and seemed to burn with holy radiance. When he struck the firmament, the psychological shockwave was absolute. Tears washed the grime from the faces of the mortal soldiers. Men who had thrown down their weapons only moments before scrambled to reclaim them, screaming litanies of defiance. In a world drowning in the madness of monsters, the great angel was a singular, blazing beacon of hope. He was proof that the master of mankind had not abandoned them. His blade flashed like captured lightning, severing the wings of gargoyles and cleaving through the armored hulls of enemy gunships. He fought with a terrifying, radiant fury. There was a reckless abandon to his movements, a beautiful, violent dance executed by a demigod who knew with absolute certainty that he would not die this day. His prophetic visions had shown him his end, and it was not in the skies above the palace. This tragic certainty granted him an invincible grace, allowing him to plunge into the thickest swarms of the enemy without hesitation. For a brief, glorious moment, it seemed as though one being alone could turn the tide of the apocalypse. His presence ignited a fire in the hearts of the defenders that the traitors could not easily extinguish. Yet the enemy was practically infinite, pouring from the sky in an unending tide of hatred and rusted iron. The brilliant flare of his arrival was magnificent, but it was only the first breath of a suffocating eternity. The initial euphoria of the counterattack began to curdle as the days turned into a relentless nightmare. Every demon cast down was replaced by a dozen more. Every traitor ship destroyed was merely a drop in an ocean of treason. The glorious savior of Terra would soon find himself shackled to the relentless, exhausting reality of the ultimate attrition. The euphoria of his arrival was but a fleeting spark, swallowed whole by the suffocating dark of the longest siege in human history. The grand illusions of a swift victory shattered against the merciless anvil of reality. For months without end, the throne world burned. In the heart of this apocalyptic crucible stood Sanguinius, the great angel, caught in an unending tempest of slaughter. The glorious paragon of Baal was being steadily unmade. His immaculate white pinions, once radiant beacons of celestial light, were now stained a sickly corpse grey with the ash of dead cities. They hung heavy, clotted black with the dried blood of a million slaughtered traitors. His golden warplate, forged by master artificers to endure the end of worlds, was a ruin of jagged fissures and weeping scorch marks. Beneath the shattered ceramite, his angelic visage had grown gaunt and hollow, stripped of its divine youth by the sheer magnitude of his burden. He was fighting a war on two fronts, enduring a physical martyrdom while bearing an unimaginable spiritual weight. We must understand the grim truth of the Imperial Palace during those dark days. The Emperor of Mankind did not walk the ramparts to rally his dying sons. The Master of Mankind was entombed deep beneath the surface, chained to the torment of the Golden Throne. There, in agonizing silence, he fought a desperate psychic war to hold the shattered webway shut against the infinite tides of the warp. With the Emperor thus confined, Sanguinius became his proxy. The great angel was the living icon of the Imperium, the de facto spiritual sovereign of the defense. Wherever the line faltered, wherever men wept in the face of absolute despair, Sanguinius was there to hold the encroaching night at bay. He threw himself into the most desperate breaches, a lone demigod standing against the infinite hatred of the traitor legions. He fought without respite, drawing upon reserves of willpower that defied mortal comprehension. Sleep was a luxury denied to him. When exhaustion finally forced him to close his eyes, he rested only in stolen snatches, leaning upon the pommel of his bloodied sword. Even then, peace was a myth. His mind was relentlessly plagued by harrowing visions of the future, a psychic torment promising nothing but fire and oblivion. He saw his own impending doom playing out again and again in the theatre of his mind, yet still he rose to fight. The relentless attrition of the War Master's hordes was slowly grinding him into dust. For every terror he cast down, 100 more monstrous aberrations crawled from the ashes to take its place. The defenders were bleeding out, surrendering courtyard after courtyard, fortress after fortress, in a desperately shrinking perimeter. The great angel and his loyal brothers paid for every inch of scorched rockcrete with rivers of their own lifeblood. There was no sanctuary left on the surface of Terra. The traitor tide surged ever forward, an unstoppable wave of corrupted iron and screaming flesh that threatened to drown the last remnants of human defiance. With the outer walls reduced to cosmic dust and the inner sanctums overrun, the broken defenders had nowhere left to retreat. The final, absolute threshold was drawn in the shadow of the ultimate precipice. The aegis of the outer palace is shattered. The walls that stood as a testament to human defiance have been ground to dust beneath the treads of traitor siege engines. Through the breached ramparts pours an ocean of madness, a tidal wave of corrupted flesh and shrieking armor that threatens to drown the last sanctuary of mankind. Billions of damned souls hurl themselves toward the final bottleneck of the Imperial Palace, the Eternity Gate. It is the most vital choke point in the history of our species. Beyond those towering adamantine doors lies the Sanctum Imperialis and the throne room of the Master of Mankind. The Loyalist defenders are broken, bleeding, and falling back in desperate retreat. Someone must hold the threshold to buy them time. Someone must stand between the fleeing survivors and the infinite wrath of the warp. Sanguinius, the great angel, claims that terrible honor. He descends to the steps of the Eternity Gate as the ultimate rearguard. Placing his own flawless form in the path of the encroaching apocalypse, he is a solitary figure of radiant gold against a suffocating tide of absolute darkness. The slaughter that follows defies mortal comprehension. Traitor legionaries, mutated cultists, and nightmare abominations from the Imperium throw themselves at the Primarch of the Blood Angels. They break upon him like black water against a diamond shore. Sanguinius does not merely fight. He becomes an instrument of pure kinetic perfection, executing a violent symphony where every swing of his blade reaps a bloody harvest. His physical mastery is pushed to its absolute, unimaginable limits. His spear pierces the hearts of monstrous warlords, while his wings carry him above the crushing press of bodies. Muscles strain against the weight of endless combat, yet his lethal grace never falters. For every second he holds, 10,000 traitors are condemned to the void. The pristine steps of the Eternity Gate are transformed into a suffocating charnel house. Soon, the great angel is wading knee-deep through a treacherous quagmire of severed limbs and shattered ceramite. The piled dead form a grotesque barricade around him. His golden armor is bathed in the vile, blackened blood of his corrupted brothers, tarnishing his celestial radiance with the grim reality of the slaughter. Yet still he stands. He is the unyielding beacon of terror, an avatar of vengeance refusing to grant the darkness a single inch of sacred ground. The Loyalists drag their wounded through the great doors, weeping at the sight of their solitary savior holding back the infinite ruin. As the colossal mechanisms of the Eternity Gate finally begin their agonizingly slow sequence to seal, the unending tide of traitors suddenly falters. The ocean of madness is violently parted. The shrieks of the dying are drowned out by a deafening roar that shakes the very foundations of the threshold. A vast shadow falls across the blood-soaked steps, cast by wings of leathery ruin. From the depths of the chaotic horde, an ancient nemesis of hellfire and brass steps forward for one final clash. From the bleeding firmament above the ultimate sanctum, a meteor of pure wrath descends. The heavens part as Karbanda, the bloodthirster who had broken the angel upon Signus Prime, crashes onto the corpse-choked earth. He has returned for his vengeance. The greater demon is a monstrous colossus of brass and hellfire, swollen with the slaughter of billions across the ruined throne world. Against this apex predator of the warp stands Sanguinius. The great angel is a ruined portrait of his former glory. His pristine armor is shattered, his feathers are stained with the lifeblood of 1,000 martyrs, and he is fighting on the very fumes of his dying endurance. Where the demon is a raging inferno of freshly harvested souls, the Primarch is a flickering candle in the encroaching dark. The clash that follows is a spectacle of sheer, unadulterated brutality. Karbanda wields a whip of brazen flame and an axe that hungers for the blood of demigods. Every strike from the demon shatters stone and rends the air with deafening thunder. Sanguinius parries with his legendary blade, but his limbs are leaden, pushed infinitely past the limits of physical exhaustion. We must pause to understand the cosmic weight of this confrontation. This is not merely a duel of flesh and warp-spawned iron. It is the metaphysical collision of primordial despair against the last defiant spark of human hope. Khorne has sent his greatest champion to extinguish the very concept of salvation. The demon batters the angel backward, step by agonizing step, across the sea of the dead. With a catastrophic impact, Karbanda hurls Sanguinius against the towering adamantium doors of the Eternity Gate. The great angel falls, his form limp and broken upon the threshold of the Emperor's inner sanctum. Karbanda towers over him, roaring his triumph to the blood-red sky as he raises his axe for the killing blow. But the daemon has misunderstood the nature of the blood angels and their sire. Driven entirely by spiritual resolve, Sanguinius reaches into a profound, untouched reserve of divine fury. Before the axe can fall, the Primarch surges upward with blinding speed. He seizes the greater demon by his brazen collar and throat. Wings beating with the explosive force of a storm, Sanguinius drags the roaring monstrosity high into the poisoned heavens. In the apex of the sky, before the eyes of traitors and loyalists alike, the angel executes his judgment. With a singular titanic exertion of strength, Sanguinius breaks Karbanda over his knee, snapping the demon's spine in a catastrophic display of martial supremacy. The colossal ruined bulk of the Bloodthirster is hurled downward like a falling star. Karbanda crashes into the heart of the traitor horde, his shattered manifestation banishing the greater demon to the darkest pits of the warp for the remainder of the heresy. High in the orbital sphere, an inexplicable anomaly registers on the augur arrays of the desperate defenders. The void shields of the Vengeful Spirit have just dropped. The slaughter upon the blasted surface of Terra chokes upon its own staggering ruin. High above the burning cradle of humanity, an impossible anomaly pierces the static of the war room. The void shields guarding the flagship of the Arch-Traitor, the Vengeful Spirit, have been lowered. It is an invitation wrapped in the cold certainty of a snare. Horus Lupercal, bloated with the limitless power of the warp, dares his father to ascend. The Emperor of Mankind, alongside the stoic Rogel Dawn and the radiant Sanguinius, understand the horrific truth. This is a trap, engineered by gods of madness. Yet it is the only path remaining. The ground war cannot be won, leaving a desperate decapitation strike as the final hope for the Imperium. For Sanguinius, the great angel, this moment carries a weight far heavier than tactical necessity. He possesses the cursed gift of foresight, and he has walked the labyrinth of his own doom for years. He looks upon the tactical displays and knows exactly what this means. This flagship is the setting of his most recurring, most agonizing vision. He knows that if he steps upon the teleportation dais, he will never return. There is no hesitation in his flawless features, only a tragic, boundless resolve. He gathers the supreme commanders of his beloved blood angels for the final time. His farewell is solemn, devoid of false hope, yet radiating an undeniable pride in his sons. Sanguinius is walking willingly to his own execution, his eyes wide open to the suffering that awaits him in the dark. Deep within the Imperial Palace, the arcane teleportation engines roar to life. The Emperor, his Praetorian, and the Angel step into the blinding light of the translation arrays. They intend to strike as a single overwhelming spearhead onto the command deck of the traitor flagship. But the warp is not a passive ocean, and Horus is no longer merely a Primarch. The Imperium boils with the malicious laughter of the ruinous powers. Sorcery and psychic malice infect the teleportation beams. The coherent strike force is violently torn apart in the transit, scattered like leaves in a chaotic hurricane. The blinding flash of the teleport fades, replaced by an oppressive, suffocating darkness. Sanguinius materializes entirely alone. His golden armor casts a dim light against surroundings that defy all sanity. The Vengeful Spirit is no longer the proud vessel he once walked alongside his favorite brother. It has been twisted into a haunted, mutated nightmare of impossible geometry and weeping sores. Bulkheads pulse with the beating of unseen hearts, and the deck plates are overgrown with slick, corrupted flesh. The air reeks of old blood, ozone, and the sheer malice of the dark gods. Separated from his father and his allies, the great angel is swallowed by the belly of the beast. He raises his shimmering blade to the gloom, knowing that the only way forward is through the absolute depths of hell. The golden angel steps into the heart of madness. The bridge of the Vengeful Spirit is no longer a monument to imperial triumph. It has been transfigured into a nightmare cathedral of bleeding iron and screaming flesh. At its center stands the being that was once the War Master. Horus Lupercal is no longer the noble son of Chthonier, nor the favored first among equals. He has become a bloated, dark vessel, distended by the bottomless power of the four Chaos gods. Warp fire bleeds from the jagged edges of his blackened armor. His once proud features are swollen with unnatural malice and the suffocating weight of absolute cosmic corruption. He is a god of ruin trapped within a weeping shell of meat and ceramite. Yet as Sanguinius raises his gleaming blade, the monster does not strike. There is no immediate howl of battle from the Lord of the Traitors. Instead, a suffocating, heavy silence falls over the desecrated command deck. Horus looks upon the great angel, not with the wrath of a conqueror, but with a twisted, genuine longing. He extends a wicked, clawed hand, offering a dark salvation forged in the depths of the Imperium. The War Master speaks, and his voice is a polyphonic chorus of a billion damned souls whispering a velvet lie. He does not wish to destroy his favored brother. He offers Sanguinius a place of supreme honor at his right hand. Horus promises that together they can cast down the corpse upon the throne and rule the galaxy as true, awakened sovereigns. But the Arch-Tempter knows the deepest, most secret vulnerabilities of the Blood Angels. Horus offers the ultimate forbidden prize. He promises to miraculously purge the red thirst from the genetic legacy of the Ninth Legion. He vows to cleanse the dark flaw that has haunted Sanguinius since he first walked upon the irradiated sands of Baal. It is an offer of agonizing perfection, tailored to break the heart of a father who only ever wanted peace for his sons. Horus genuinely believes his own beautiful delusions, utterly convinced that the Dark Pantheon can grant the salvation the Emperor so cruelly denied them. The golden son of the Emperor listens as the sickening promises echo through the corrupt air. Sanguinius does not shout his defiance. He looks upon his fallen brother, and his luminous eyes are filled not with terror, but with a profound and crushing pity. He sees entirely through the false, gleaming promises of the warp. Horus Lupercal was no longer merely a Primarch. He was the vessel of the Pantheon, a god of ruin fueled by the infinite surging malice of the warp. Every swing of the War Master brought with it the crushing weight of dark magic. The air itself wept as the talon of Horus tore through the fabric of reality. Sanguinius ducked beneath arcs of corrupting lightning, his wings beating with desperate, ragged ferocity. He was exhausted beyond mortal comprehension. Days of endless war at the Eternity Gate had drained him, and his feathers were already stained crimson from 100 unhealed wounds. Against this, Horus stood fresh, dominant, and sickeningly cruel. The Warmaster did not merely fight his brother, he toyed with him. Where Sanguinius poured every ounce of his failing essence into breathtaking flurries of strikes, Horus met them with the indifferent malice of a dark god. Herein lies the ultimate tragedy of the duel upon the Vengeful Spirit. Sanguinius did not fight to win. The angel was blessed and cursed with the gift of absolute foresight, and he knew his doom was sealed the moment he stepped foot into that chamber. He knew he could never defeat this ascendant avatar of chaos. Instead, he fought solely to leave a mark. He fought to pry open a single bloody weakness for the Emperor to later exploit. It was a sacrifice of pure, unimaginable devotion. He threw his broken body into the storm of hatred, knowing that every labored breath was his last. His divine blade flashed like lightning, yet it merely skated across the blackened armor plates of his brother. Desperate thrusts that would have cleaved lesser monsters in twain barely scratched the warp-forged obsidian of the Warmaster. In brutal return, every careless blow from Horus yielded catastrophic ruin. The great mace worldbreaker swung with the inexorable gravity of a dead planet. When the horrific weapon connected, golden ceramite shattered like brittle glass. Bones cracked with sickening echoes, muscle tore, and the divine blood of the great angel spilled out across the corrupted deck. Sanguinius was beaten back, his elegant guard systematically dismantled by the sheer, overwhelming brute force of the arch-enemy. Blackened sorcery gnawed at his flesh, rotting away his majestic splendor, while Horus laughed with a voice composed of 1,000,000,000 screaming souls. Still, the Lord of the Blood Angels refused to yield the floor. He dragged himself upright from the sundered deck, his radiant halo dimmed but stubbornly unextinguished. Through agony that would have broken the minds of immortals, Sanguinius raised his blade once more. He stared directly into the seething abyss of his brother's eyes, offering silent defiance to the encroaching dark. Horus raised his monstrous talon, the warp energies coalescing into a blinding sphere of annihilation as he moved to deliver his fatal judgment. The Dark Pantheon's chosen vessel finally wearies of the dance. Horus Lupercal, bloated with the limitless power of the Pantheon, allows his dwindling patience to evaporate into the suffocating atmosphere of the flagship. He moves with a speed that defies his massive, corrupted bulk. The Warmaster catches the great angel mid-flight, snatching the airborne demigod from the poisoned air of the command deck. The brutalization that follows is not a duel of brothers, but the slaughter of an exhausted martyr. Armored fists rain down upon gold and feather, shattering the majestic panoply of the Blood Angel's sire. Sanguinius is battered across the unholy sanctum, his divine grace eclipsed by the raw, surging hatred of chaos incarnate. Yet even as his bones fracture and his lifeblood flows freely upon the deck, Sanguinius does not yield to despair. He knows the visions of his doom are now absolute truth. He embraces the bitter prophecy. In his final, fleeting moments of consciousness, the angel directs his gaze through the swirling dark sorcery protecting his brother. Through the haze of his own impending death, he sees a weakness. There is a tiny, almost microscopic flaw in the corrupted battleplate of the Warmaster. It is a hairline fracture born of pride, a singular imperfection in armor forged by the dark mechanicum and warded by the ruinous powers. Sanguinius summons the very last ember of his celestial might. He ignores the crushing agony of his failing body to deliver one final desperate thrust with his shattered blade. The weapon finds its mark with impossible precision. The blade strikes true, yet against the warp-infused invulnerability of the Arch-Traitor, the wound seals instantly without leaving a single trace. Sanguinius buys no physical vulnerability for his father to exploit, achieving only a profound spiritual victory of absolute defiance before his life force is finally extinguished. Retribution from the Warmaster is instantaneous and utterly devoid of mercy. Enraged by the defiance of his broken brother, Horus unleashes the full, terrifying wrath of his accursed talon. The killing strike is brutal, ugly, and entirely bereft of ceremony. Claws wreathed in dark lightning close around the throat of the galaxy's most beautiful being. With a sickening, definitive torsion of his armored gauntlet, Horus snaps the neck of Sanguinius. The crack of breaking bone echoes like a tolling bell across the desecrated bridge. The Warmaster rips the majestic, pure white wings from the angel, breaking them into ruined, blood-soaked splinters. Horus carelessly casts the ruined corpse aside. The mangled body of Sanguinius impacts the cold, blood-stained deck with a heavy, hollow thud. The light of the Imperium is extinguished in the gloom of the Vengeful Spirit. Horus towers over the shattered remains, roaring his dark triumph to the uncaring void. He does not yet realize the fatal significance of the tiny breach carved into his dark armor. The Warmaster believes his absolute victory is finally secured. But the death of an angel is not a quiet affair. The spilling of such pure blood demands a toll from the universe itself. As the golden spark of Sanguinius fades from the material realm, an unseen shockwave begins to build. The physical death of the great angel was a tragedy of flesh and bone, but the true catastrophe unfolded within the immaterial realm. Primarchs are not mere mortal constructs of flesh and genecraft, but entities of staggering warp-born power. When Horus tore the life from his brother, he did not merely end a life. He shattered a radiant soul into jagged fragments of pure agony. Because of the profound, blood-deep bond Sanguinius shared with his sons, this murder could never be contained to the cold decks of the Vengeful Spirit. It became a psychic shockwave, a deafening death scream that violently ruptured the fabric of the Imperium. Down on the ravaged surface of Terra, amidst the choking ash and endless slaughter of the siege, the phenomenon struck without warning. Every single warrior of the 9th Legion stopped. In unison, 100,000 blood angels abruptly dropped to their blood-stained knees. They did not merely sense the passing of their gene-sire, they lived it. In that agonizing fraction of a second, every son of Sanguinius felt the suffocating grip of the Warmaster closing around their own throats. They felt the cataclysmic strike of the Worldbreaker Maul shattering their ribs. They tasted the bitter, poisonous ash of ultimate betrayal. Their minds were plunged into the suffocating darkness of a father, realizing his favorite brother was lost to the primordial annihilator. The collective psyche of the Blood Angels Legion fractured irrevocably under the weight of this borrowed doom. Before this moment, the sons of Baal wrestled with the red thirst, a feral urge for violence and blood that lurked at the edges of their nobility. Now, bathed in the psychic backlash of the ultimate fratricide, that genetic flaw mutated into a terminal curse. It was forged into something infinitely worse in the fires of Sanguinius and his dying despair. This was the birth of the Black Rage. The noble sons of the great angel were stripped of their sanity, their minds permanently locked in an endless, looping nightmare of the final, agonizing moments of their father. They rose from their knees, not as the glorious defenders of the Imperium, but as screaming revenants of pure wrath. They saw the face of Horus in every traitor, every mutant, and every shadow across the Imperial palace. The tragedy of the Blood Angels was cemented for 10,000 years in that singular, horrific psychic scream. Yet as the sons lost their minds in the dirt of Terra, the echoes of that psychic death knell reached another mind upon the flagship. A blinding aura of psychic majesty was already tearing through the corrupted corridors of the Vengeful Spirit. The master of mankind had sensed the extinguishing of his brightest light. A terrible cold fury coalesced within the Emperor of mankind as he approached the final threshold. The golden boots of the master of mankind struck the corrupted deck of the Vengeful Spirit. The air was thick with the stench of chaos and the static of dark sorcery, but the Emperor of mankind saw only the ruined form of his most beloved creation. There, lying broken at the feet of the Warmaster, was Sanguinius. The great angel, the brightest star of the Imperium, was dead. For 10,000 years, the Emperor has been remembered as a cold and calculating deity, a being of pure intellect who viewed his primarchs as mere tools of conquest. Yet in this terrible moment, the mask of the detached creator shattered completely. A profound and agonizing grief washed over the master of mankind, a sorrow so immense it threatened to eclipse the blinding light of his own psychic majesty. He looked upon the shattered wings and the bloodless flesh of his perfect son, and the heart of the Emperor wept. But there was no time for mourning, for the Arch-Traitor stood triumphant, swollen with the limitless power of the ruinous powers. The tactical reality of the ensuing duel was a nightmare of cosmic proportions. The Emperor was a being of unmatched power, yet he was fighting a vessel channeling the combined might of the four Chaos gods. More paralyzing than the warp-infused strength of Horus was the Emperor's own devastating hesitation. Despite the horrors unleashed upon the galaxy, the Emperor looked upon the monster before him and still saw his favored son. He held back the full fury of his wrath, hoping against all reason that some sliver of the old Horus remained to be salvaged. This mercy cost him dearly. The Warmaster struck with apocalyptic malice, severing tendons, crushing bone, and tearing the flesh of the Emperor with monstrous cruelty. The master of mankind was brought to his knees, his golden armor rent, his lifeblood spilling upon the defiled deck. Death stood moments away, ready to extinguish the light of humanity forever. Through the haze of agony and blinding pain, the Emperor's gaze fell once more upon the lifeless, mutilated body of Sanguinius. The psychic death scream of Sanguinius did not merely echo in the minds of his sons. It struck them with the force of a tectonic rupture, fundamentally rewriting the architecture of their souls. In an instant, the noble host of the 9th Legion was unmade. To understand the depth of this tragedy, one must separate this new affliction from the ancient curse of their bloodline. The red thirst is a biological flaw, a dark vampiric urge woven directly into their gene seed that demands the consumption of flesh and vital fluids. The black rage is something entirely different, born not of biology, but of profound psychic trauma. It is a total psychological collapse. As the shockwave of their Primarch's murder washed over the defenders of the Imperial Palace, reality itself fractured for the Blood Angels. The shattered ramparts of Terra vanished from their eyes. The choking ash of the throne world was replaced by the cold, metallic reek of a traitor flagship. The afflicted Astartes were plunged into a waking nightmare, hallucinating completely. They no longer saw the traitor siege lines or the ruined sanctums of their home. They saw only the arched bulkheads and obsidian decking of the Vengeful Spirit. Worse still, they no longer knew their own names. Identity disintegrated beneath the sheer weight of their father's psychic agony. Every single warrior caught in the grip of the black rage believed, with absolute and terrifying conviction, that he was Sanguinius. They were trapped in the perpetual moment of his death, endlessly reliving the despair and fury of being surrounded by the monstrous horrors of Horus Lupercal. Driven by this inescapable delusion, the Blood Angels launched a counterattack of apocalyptic violence. They abandoned all tactical discipline, throwing themselves into the traitor lines in a berserk, unstoppable frenzy. No bolt shell or chain blade could halt their advance, for they were entirely numb to pain, sustained only by the singular desire to tear the Arch-Traitor limb from limb. They slaughtered their way through the heretic hordes, rendering power armor and corrupted flesh into unrecognizable ruin. The traitors, accustomed to sowing terror, found themselves utterly broken by this tide of absolute madness. The sons of Sanguinius had won the ground war for the Imperial Palace, but the cost was beyond measure. They had secured the throne world, yet they had irrevocably lost their sanity. The psychic imprint of Sanguinius's demise had permanently cursed the 9th Legion, leaving them trapped in a cycle of endless, inherited grief. The victorious survivors stood amidst mountains of the dead, forever marked by a terminal madness that would define their bloodline. This inescapable doom would cast a long, suffocating shadow over the centuries to come, forcing the descendants of the Great Angel to find new, desperate methods to manage their cursed existence as the galaxy ground onward toward the 41st millennium. Ten millennia have ground the galaxy to dust, yet for the sons of Baal, no time has passed at all. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, the Blood Angels and their successor chapters do not merely remember the death of their Primarch, they live it every single day. The culture of this noble lineage is entirely shackled to that singular ancient murder aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Every battle they fight is shadowed by the terrifying certainty that the psychic echo of Sanguinius dying will eventually claim their minds. This is the Black Rage, and it is entirely inescapable. When a brother finally falls to this apocalyptic psychic backlash, his sanity is obliterated, replaced only by the agonized perspective of his dying father. For these doomed souls, there is no cure, no salvation, and no return. They are inducted into the Death Company. The rituals of the Death Company are a solemn, tragic testament to a legion in mourning. When the madness takes them, the afflicted are stripped of their vibrant crimson heraldry. Their armor is painted pitch black, the color of absolute mourning. Across this dark canvas, the Tech Marines and chaplains paint stark red crosses, symbols that directly represent the grievous wounds suffered by Sanguinius at the hands of the Arch-Traitor. Clad in the livery of death, these lost brothers are unleashed upon the battlefield in a terrifying storm of unfettered brutality. They do not feel pain, and they do not comprehend tactics. They seek only one thing. They seek a glorious, violent end in the Emperor's name to expiate the sorrow that burns in their shattered minds. Guiding these howling berserkers is a task of profound sorrow, falling upon the shoulders of the chapter's chaplains. These spiritual shepherds do not command the Death Company with standard military orders. Instead, they must enter into the shared hallucination of the doomed. The chaplains speak to the fallen as if they were the great angel himself. They call them "My Lord Sanguinius," encouraging their delusion, pointing them toward the enemy and naming them traitors of the Horus heresy. It is a heartbreaking theater of war, where loyal sons are manipulated through their own psychic agony to break the enemy lines. If, by some grim twist of fate, a warrior of the Death Company survives the slaughter, his reward is not glory. The madness cannot be reversed. The chaplains must walk among the gore-soaked survivors in the silent aftermath of battle. With whispered prayers and profound reverence, they grant the Emperor's peace to their ruined brothers, executing them cleanly to end their eternal torment. It is a terrible price to pay for the strength to defend humanity. Yet the blood spilled by these tortured souls is merely a reflection of a much grander sacrifice, one that has elevated their fallen father far beyond the status of a mere general. His martyrdom has transcended the bloodline of the 9th Legion, echoing out across 1,000,000 worlds to shape the very soul of the human species. Yet while his genetic scions writhe in the darkness of their shared curse, the wider Imperium looks upon the great angel with blinding reverence. To the teeming trillions of humanity, Sanguinius is no mere historical figure or tragic commander. He is the Martyr-God. He is the most exalted and venerated of all the Emperor's creations, elevated above even his brother Primarchs in the dogma of the Imperial cult. His sacrifice is the holy foundation upon which the endurance of the Imperium is built. This devotion reaches its zenith during Sanguinala, the holiest festival across 1,000,000 worlds. On this sacred day, citizens from the highest spire lords to the lowliest underhive wretches pin red badges above their hearts. This simple act of wearing crimson is a solemn pledge to remember the blood he willingly shed to preserve mankind. They pray to a perfect being of grace and light, entirely oblivious to the monstrous thirst that devours his sons. Yet beneath the weight of this galactic worship, a profound mystery endures on the battlefields of the present age. When the Blood Angels are pushed to the absolute brink of annihilation, when all hope is lost and the darkness threatens to swallow the sons of Baal entirely, salvation sometimes descends on golden wings. This entity is known only as the Sanguinor. It is a glorious apparition of wrath and radiance, clad in master-crafted golden armor and bearing the very visage of the fallen Primarch. The Sanguinor speaks no words, descending from the heavens to slaughter the greatest foes of the chapter before vanishing as mysteriously as it arrived. Scholars and theologians of the Adeptus Astartes whisper countless theories regarding the true nature of this avatar. Some believe it is merely a psychic echo of Sanguinius himself, a lingering imprint of his unmatched martial majesty burned permanently into the fabric of reality. Others of a more radical disposition argue that the Sanguinor is a manifestation born of the warp, an entity coalesced into being by the raw, fervent faith of the quadrillions who pray to the great angel every solar day. The most poignant theory suggests that it is a noble shard of the Primarch's own soul. They claim that in the final moments before his death, Sanguinius cast off the pure, untainted essence of his being to spare it from the dark corruption of the Arch-Traitor. Whatever the truth of its origin may be, the existence of the Sanguinor proves one undeniable fact. The body of Sanguinius may lie in state within the stasis vaults of Baal, cold and lifeless, but his spirit refuses to abandon his children. Even in death, the great angel continues to fight the long war against the encroaching night. This eternal vigilance is both a profound blessing and a lingering herald of an ultimate tragic reckoning. The galaxy wept when the great angel fell. Sanguinius was the absolute pinnacle of the master of mankind's grand design, a being of such flawless grace, physical beauty, and unyielding nobility that even the ruinous powers of the warp coveted his magnificent soul. He was the ultimate paragon of hope for the human species. Had the great betrayal never come to pass, it was Sanguinius who could have been the chosen sovereign of a glorious golden age, leading mankind into an eternity of enlightenment, art, and universal peace. He possessed the compassion his father lacked, serving as the very best of us, a shining beacon in a cosmos steadily consumed by gathering shadows. Instead, his absolute purity was violently extinguished aboard the Vengeful Spirit. His divine life was forfeit, offered up upon the blood-stained altar of a shattered dream. Look upon the sprawling, nightmarish Imperium he died to save, and you will understand the true, suffocating depths of this tragedy. Sanguinius did not bleed to usher in a celestial paradise. His ultimate sacrifice merely purchased 10,000 years of agonizing, relentless decay. He bought survival for a rotting, stagnant carcass of an empire, a brutal and tyrannical regime where hope is punished as heresy and compassion is a forgotten myth. The blinding, glorious light of the ninth Primarch was traded for endless cycles of bureaucratic ignorance, systemic cruelty, and endless, grinding bloodshed. We are a dying species clinging desperately to the cold, crumbling ruins of a forgotten glory, shivering in the cosmic dark without our brightest star to warm us. The universe is infinitely darker for his permanent absence. Yet the cruelest and most agonizing irony of the great angel's martyrdom was not the miserable state of the galaxy he left behind, but the inescapable curse he inflicted upon his own beloved blood. Sanguinius died to preserve humanity, but in his dying breath he damned his own sons to a fate worse than mere extinction. The psychic shockwave of his brutal murder at the hands of Horus was so profound, so devastatingly agonizing, that it echoed fiercely through the warp, piercing the veil of time itself. It became a congenital, spiritual scar upon the soul of every blood angel and successor to ever walk the stars. This is the horrific legacy of the Black Rage. To be a genetic son of Sanguinius is to be doomed to eventually lose one's mind to the psychic echoes of that ancient, bitter betrayal. They are forced to eternally relive his final, desperate moments, fighting and dying in a state of absolute hallucinatory madness. They charge into battle screaming the name of the Arch-Traitor, trapped in the mind of their dying father, experiencing his terror and pain anew. He saved mankind, but he doomed his most loyal children to die his horrific death over and over, until the stars themselves burn down to ash. The great angel is gone forever, There are no more radiant saviors waiting in the warp to lift humanity from the bloody mire of its own making. We are left only with the cold silence of space, the eternal weeping of his shattered suns, and the suffocating weight of a beautiful future that should have been. Sanguinius was the light, and now there is only the unforgiving dark. The golden dream is dead, leaving humanity alone to face the static void.